Congressional role in all of this, Representative Brad Sherman of California, a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. I just spoke with my colleague Kelly O'Donnell about this letter from the president that he put out. In it, he talked about how those strikes were vital to the national security of the United States and that the U.S. will take additional action if needed. Your reaction?
Well, I would have hoped that that letter would have bound the president to follow the War Powers Act, something his predecessors have not officially bound themselves to do, but it is the law of the land. And that defines what a president can do without congressional approval and what they have to have congressional approval to do. And the basic rule is anything over 60 days requires congressional approval. Now, unfortunately, President Obama didn't follow that when it came to Libya. My hope is that that Trump would declare that he's going to follow the law in the future. This event, of course, didn't take 60 days. It took scarcely 6 minutes. So I think the president was acting within his authority, but I don't know what he plans to do. And if he plans to trigger the War Powers Act, he ought to consult Congress.
Congressman, whether legal or not, do you agree with the action of the strikes on Syria?
Well, we have three objectives in Syria. One is to protect the Syrian people. The second is to destroy ISIS. And the third is to protect the Chemical Warfare Convention, which prohibits the use of chemical weapons. And to do that all without repeating the Cuban Missile Crisis and confronting Russia, or repeating Iraq and Afghanistan, where we take over and try to occupy a whole country. I think this action was a prudent step only with regard to one of those objectives, and that is to protect the Chemical Warfare Convention. I think Assad should realize that these weapons are counterproductive for him, that if he uses these weapons, he'll pay a price. And I think we have to give tremendous credit to President Obama, who got 2.5 million pounds of these toxic weapons out of Assad's hands and to international authorities for destruction. We can only imagine how many hundreds and thousands of Syrians would have died if we hadn't gotten these terrible weapons mostly out of Assad's hands. Obviously, he kept a portion back, but 2.5 million pounds were removed from his hands, and we've got to give President Obama credit for that.
Well, and Congressman, a lot of people are now urging diplomacy after these strikes, but considering what you just talked about in having these weapons taken out of Assad's hands and then seeing what happened last week and that he didn't obviously get rid of all of his chemical weapons, can we even trust the path of diplomacy at this point?
There's limited trust when you're dealing with evil individuals, and yet those are the individuals you have to deal with. You can trust the fact that if 2.5 million pounds of toxic gas is delivered to international authorities, that Assad has 2.5 million pounds less of those chemical weapons. But obviously he cheated. Obviously he's killed people with the portion of the gas that he still has. But if we only conduct diplomacy with people we trust, we won't have any effect on the tyrants that we really have to deal with.
All right, point taken. Congressman Brad Sherman, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up.